school year. Our department's goals for the town hall today are to promote a constructive and open discussion about student identities and experiences on the UNR campus in an effort to educate one another and address recent concerns. We are hosting this to provide a platform where individual perspectives and opinions can congregate. We encourage respectful dialogue, which will be enforced by a set of ground rules established by our moderators. There's also a panel here today consisting of ASUN and student representatives who are available to answer and respond to specific inquiries and questions. And now I will allow the panel to introduce themselves. I'm starting President Hall.
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Dominique Hall, and I'm currently the ASUN president. I'm really glad to be here today to answer any questions that people have about identity and how it relates to me. So yeah, thank you guys for being here.
Okay, and next we have ASUN Senator Lauren Harvey.
Hi everyone, my name is Lauren Harvey. What about me? I'm a sophomore here at the university. I am a senator for the College of Liberal Arts. I'm also the ASUN parliamentarian right now, so that basically just means that I help train officers on how to run meetings, advise the Senate body, things like that. It's a very not interesting introduction, but that's a little bit about me. I'm an international affairs major, Spanish major, and a gender, race, and identity major. And thank you all for having us.
Thank you. And the last member of our panel is Shay Jordan, a member of the GRI sorority on campus.
Hi, my name is Shay Jordan. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And like previously mentioned, I'm currently the traditions keeper for Gamma Rho Lambda, the first LGBTQ+ sorority in the state of Nevada, and I am also vice president for Queer Student Union.
Thank you. And now I will let the moderators kind of take control and introduce themselves.
Okay, who are the moderators? Hello?
Hi, Dr. Likes. Actually, you were supposed to be one of the moderators today.
Oh, good. Okay. I was just rereading the what you updated. I can introduce myself, and then I believe Jose, are you the other moderator?
I'm with you today on this. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So, thank you for the invitation. And I'm Dr. Jody Likes. I work in the center, Every Student, Every Story. I teach several courses. I think probably don't see anyone who's been in my classes, but I teach Gender, Race, and Identity 201, and that's contemporary diversity, as well as hip hop studies and children and families in a multi-ethnic society. I've been at the center 10 years now in my role in the African diaspora program, but that's my introduction. How about we start there?
Thank you, Jody. I have the opportunity to work with Jody. We both work in the center, Every Student, Every Story. I came to Nevada, Reno most recently from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I was the assistant director of multicultural services there, and I'm the director of multicultural services here and oversee the center, Every Student, Every Story. I've been working in this area of diversity and these efforts since 2001, since I was an undergrad, and I've always had a passion for this type of work, and initially started my work with outreach, going out into communities and trying to build those pathways for students from underrepresented communities, minoritized communities to connect to institutions of higher learning. And so that's my passion, and I still continue to hold that and have the fortune of working with Dr. Likes on these issues within the center and on campus.
I think we wanted to lay down some ground rules as I'm using the gallery mode on Zoom in order to see the other participants and make sure that everyone's taking turns speaking, no over talking. Everyone have their camera turned on if it's possible for you so that there's no anonymity. Raise your hand when you want to speak. It's basically just be respectful to the people in the room, and then acknowledge and listen to the moderator. That's always self-serving, but I kind of like it today. and the moderators, and stay focused on the topic at hand, which I'm really good at getting everyone off on a different tangent. And I think that sometimes these discussions need some spontaneity where you might go to how you're feeling and saying, so we're not trying to say, don't change the topic or anything, but we're here to moderate. So we got you on that one. It's just be respectful. And a lot of times when we open this discussion, it can be emotions, feelings. So we're not trying to shut any of those down. I think that's probably the benefit of coming together and having a dialogue.
And I just want to add, just fundamentally, it's okay to not agree. I think oftentimes we feel we're debating, and we're not in a debate stage. We're listening to each other, and it's okay to say, I respectfully disagree, and I'd like to engage you on challenging that idea. I was just in a meeting with Sandy earlier, and it was a beautiful meeting because we were able to engage with each other's professionals in that way. And so just think about that. We're not trying to bring everyone to the same page or feel, because you all have separate life experiences that are bound to privilege and power, and lack of privilege and lack of power. And so when we're engaging in conversations, oftentimes that's where we're coming from. So no one's going to deny your experience and your feelings and your thoughts. So we're here to hear the plethora of ideas that you all have.
Should we start with the questions and see, or does that sound like a good move?
Yes, we can get started. Thank you.
All right, so what's our first question? Are we doing?
The first question that we have here is, how do you define and interpret your own identity? Have you ever felt unsafe or unwelcome on campus because of your identity?
Who wants to start?
I guess I can start. So how I interpret my identity is, as a Black woman, I feel like a lot of my experiences can't be related to anyone else who isn't Black, because I feel like being Black has its own interpretations. Like, the only people who experience anti-Blackness are Black people. And so I feel like in terms of oppression, I can't really relate to, I guess, another person of color that isn't Black, because I feel like there are just certain there's just certain things that comes with being Black that doesn't come with being a different race. And in terms of being unwelcomed on campus, I have felt unwelcomed with some of the organizations I have been in, because there's only 3% of Black students on this campus. And so when you really come to a campus where the majority, 90% of the people don't even look like you, it's like, you can feel really uncomfortable, which is how I felt in the past.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's hard even to, that's I think a very strong point of leadership, because I think it's hard to even make that statement when maybe knowing that someone might not understand it, right? Maybe not understand your everyday experience. And then maybe one for me, and I'm not going to respond to everything, but that was kind of a powerful start, right? It is like that even Black people on campus are having a different experience. So not all Black people have the same experience. And so how interesting that sometimes we don't even talk to each other about that experience. We isolate and say, you know what, I'm living this every day, but I didn't share it with other people. So thank you for taking that. That was a bold start.
Are there other panelists that can weigh in? Oh, Shay, I see you.
Yeah, I want to jump off of that point really quickly, especially with what was said about that representation in our campus. I will personally say that while I've never felt outright welcomed. In any way, it's sometimes never an outright thing. There are a lot of times in which there are facets of my identity that have to be broken apart because I cannot control the way that people see me. I cannot control the way that I'm viewed to other people. A lot of the times it is a large separation of me being a Black person. There's a separation of me being a trans person. And those things have to consistently, I either have to consistently put myself in situations in which I have to put those two together, or I have to deal with the fact that in those groups, one of those facets of my identity will not be spoken about or will not be acknowledged. So for me in particular, my identity is made up of so many different things, just because depending on the circumstances and depending on where I am, some of those things won't always be seen, and some of those things are a lot louder than other things are. I will say that I have seen a lot of progress on this campus, especially since now I feel like I'm seeing a bit of representation with the fact that we have a Black woman as ASUN president. And that's something that I'm really, really proud of because I was never 100% sure if I would be able to see that, while I was here, or if that was something we'd have to wait until later. And sometimes, to be quite frank, sometimes, the environment isn't ready for that type of representation, but it's needed anyway. And those conversations have to be started, and dialogues such as this have to be opened up.
I guess for kind of the way that I identify and, the way that I kind of approach this situation is just first by, thinking of what is identity, because I think a lot of the reasons that we have kind of harsh discussions on this is because of the fact that we all define identity as something different. So the way that I guess that I really define identity are really the factors that that really inform the way that you live your everyday life. That they affect the way that you experience the world around you and the way that you interact with people and things like that. And so, my identity as I'm a white woman, I'm heterosexual, I'm cisgender, I'm a first generation student, I identify as an ally. All these things really are what inform the way that I do life on a day-to-day basis. And because, many of those identity factors that I just mentioned are ones that have historically been tied to privilege and been tied to the oppressor, on this campus, I have not felt that unwelcomeness or oppression or discrimination, anything like that, because for the most part, for most of those identity factors that I identify with, this campus was really made for people like me. And so that's why, my identity as an ally really comes into play, because this campus was made for me. And so, using those privileges that come with my whiteness, my heterosexuality, my cisgender, all of those things is what I need to use to bring people who don't have those privileges into the conversation, and being represented in things like ASUN and in the university as a whole.
Thank you all for sharing those experiences. It's not difficult to acknowledge privilege or lack thereof, right, in the context of an institution, or not feeling that sense of community in the institution, or feeling it. There could be guilt with the privilege, and that's not a healthy place to be in either, as we're exploring these ideas and these concepts. But I don't know, Dr. Likes, if you want to have ask the next question or have.
No, other than for me, I spent a lot of time as a student, and I'm not trying to make it about me necessarily, but it sounds similar, that I wanted to learn about Blackness, right? Everything for me was Black power, Black history, Chicano history, like what those are the things that drew me. And it wasn't until later on that I started learning about whiteness and the space that whiteness holds as an identity. And then it starts to make things clear, because everything isn't about my identity. And as you can learn about different identities, is powerful. And if you are white and are able to recognize white as a location in racial identity, is powerful, because you're also developing in how you see the world, how you see racial dynamics, and how you see racial identity. I use heavily the work of Janet Helm's racial identity development theory, and I mean, I've kind of built the things that I teach, the things that I ask students to work from there. And she's powerful work on that. We're not all in the same place. That there are stages to this. So the first models were stage models. But let's see. The next question we have is, how has your identity shaped your experience on campus? Who are all of the panelists? Because I came in past the introduction. If you're a panelist, who's all the panelists?
It's me, Shay, and Lauren.
Okay, let's start Shay again.
So the question was, how does my identity shape my experience on campus, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I feel like I have a very unique perspective as far as my identity and how it interacts with my on-campus environment, because I really found a lot of my identity while being on campus. I came from a home that didn't have as much of a view of the world that I was able to gain when I did come to campus. I came in with a very closeted mindset. And so I think a lot of myself hadn't been developed yet. And so I'm really lucky that I was able to attend such a great university that was able to expand my worldview in that sense. But at the same time, as I continued to discover my identity, I also began to discover the intersectionality of discrimination and, unwelcomeness that came with it. So I got all of it kind of at the same time. While I am very proud of the university in the sense that I have found a lot of the great resources that we provide to our students in the same position as me with those same intersectional issues, such as the center, every student, every story. I also found that there was a lot of frustration within the communities that I was able to bond myself with, and the issues that I consistently found on our campus. So this campus has definitely shaped, this campus has definitely expanded my worldview as far as the communities and the intersectionalities that exist between all the different facets of an identity, including race and gender and sexuality. But at the same time, it also very much exposed me to a lot of the issues that not only lie when looking at those communities from the outside, but then those issues within those communities as well when you attempt to intersect all of these issues, which has honestly done nothing more than, pushed me to want to explore these issues further and to have more of these discussions and look at, what can we do, what do we need to talk about, and what needs to be opened up for discussion.
Dom, Lauren, what's going down?
Dom, you want to go?
Yeah, this is a great question.
So I think, since kind of building off of what Shay said, I think intersectionality is a big part of my identity. As a sexual assault survivor, as a low-income student, first-generation student, and minority student, I think I have a lot of identities that other people, you don't have to look like me to relate to my identities. And I feel like it's really kind of being here has made me, I guess, be exposed to my identities because of the discrimination that happens to each one that I intersect with. So with being exposed to my identities, I think it's made me more to embrace them. And I think this has helped me find my own identity, be my own person. And I think this has even helped me with my positions on campus and really just embracing my identities and showing students that you can showing students that you can be successful even if you come from a background that a lot of people don't come from.
To kind of go off of that, I feel like I've had a similar experience in that, coming to this university, coming into stepping into this culture, really this mini society, I guess you could say, has really led me to embrace certain parts of my identity. I think on a day-to-day basis, we really use different parts of our identity. A really big identity factor for me is that I'm a big sister, but that doesn't necessarily, inform my experience at the university instead with my family and things like that. So kind of going off of what Dr. Like said about, whiteness being a location, I think my different identifying factors have put me in a certain location in the college culture, and it's in such a way that my location relative to other people is basically set. And that's kind of how it is, I feel like, when it comes to any identifying factors: race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, all of those things. And so in that way, my identity basically says, you're in this position at the university, you're in this position of privilege, position of not having privilege, whatever it is. And I really think that, for me, someone who says that I do have more privilege than not, I am a first generation student, but I don't see myself as someone who is necessarily underrepresented or a minority student. And I feel like a lot of us with the privileges that I have are really quick to defend those privileges. And that is something that really shapes our experience as well, because we're so caught up, especially with whiteness, so caught up with defending ourselves and saying, oh, I don't, whiteness isn't this, or white people don't do that, all of these things. When we're confronted by people who don't have those privileges, that it really makes for difficult situations, because it makes the situation seem very us versus them. And I think that's what shaped a lot of students' experiences, not just, on this campus, but on campuses nationwide, because we are so caught up in, I identify as this, you're that, and so we're different, case closed. And so that's why I think conversations like this are so important, because we're having dialogue about our identities, rather than just saying, you're different than me, I don't want to talk to you about my identity, your identity, whatever it is.
And thank you all of the panelists for you're raising so many issues and stating your experience, but teaching us a lot. And and for me, I was invited to be on this panel. And I have the role as a moderator, but intersectionality came from Kimberly Crenshaw, Patricia Hill Collins, who were Black women talking about what their experience as Black women meant to them. It came from the Combahee River Collective, and it came from Anna Julia Cooper. And all throughout history, Black women have stated what it meant for them to be Black women. And how interesting that as you go to intersectionality, that we're still just it's barely kind of in scholarship is popular. The other thing is that I see a lot of students have this be a time when they start to question and explore who you are as students, your identity. When you're a student, you might be in a different position than you were when you were at home. And so a lot of research talks about students and exploring identity. And then for whiteness and what you were describing, Lauren, as, to me, it's white fragility. And Robin DiAngelo does a great work for kind of telling the experience of calling out whiteness from the perspective of a white woman. So there's a lot of scholars that do it, but you're all just like, you have so much wisdom in your experience already. But I wouldn't shut down that your youth is a perfect time to be with other people, to be in an environment where you have to say, who am I? What does that mean to me? What does my previous experience mean? And without further discussion, because it's not a lecture, Jose, I got the next question. And Jose, can you get the last one after?
Yeah.
All right. How do you feel about the current ASUN student government's ability to address identity? And that's to our panelists. We're still with panelists. Yes.
Well, personally, I think a lot of ASUN officers are afraid to address identity because they aren't really educated on the topic, because most of ASUN are white students. I'm just going to be honest. And I feel like when it's time to talk about identity, especially at retreat, because that's when we talk about identity the most with one training, which I don't agree with. But it seems like from what I experienced in that retreat last year, everyone just gets afraid to talk about identity. They don't want to talk about it. And I think that's problematic, because I think we need to talk about it so that we can all understand for our students that we represent. So I feel like, the current ASUN administration is afraid to address identity.
Panelists, thank you. Lauren, Shay, you're up.
Jumping off of that, I think that ASUN taking a serious look at identities and taking a serious look at a lot of the intersectional issues that pop up when you talk about identities is going to be a long, hard road. And I don't say that to say that it's going to be a slow process. I just think that it's going to be a difficult one, because a lot of the issue that bringing up these identities causes is what you mentioned earlier, Dr. Likes, not just white fragility, but just this idea that you have to look outside of your own perspective and look outside of your own identity. And I know a lot of the time when I've had discussions about identity with people, one of the biggest things is that, well, that they say is that, well, that doesn't take away from the things that I've done. I think that's one of the biggest issues, is that looking at this sense of privilege and looking at how this experience is going to be very different than someone who doesn't look like you, all of a sudden seems to mean that, you know, all of the accomplishments that you've made, all of the good things that you've done have all just chalked up to privilege, which isn't true. Privilege has an impact on how people experience the world and how people experience different situations, but under no circumstances does that privilege mean that was the only reason why, you know, you got something done, or that's the only reason why this is important. So being able to take that away out of these conversations, instead of talking about, you know, well, your goals and your accomplishments were all, you know, impacted by your privilege, just taking a look at, you know, my experience is shaped by the fact that I don't look like a lot of people I go to school with. The way that I'm looked at, the way that I'm talked to, the way that, you know, I'm going to experience job interviews, the way I'm going to experience internship interviews, that I'm going to experience, you know, relationships with coworkers, is going to look very different between the two of us. And it's time that we start taking a really big look at how we think about these things. We take a really big look at how we talk to people. We take a really big look at our tone of voice, and taking a minute to step out of our own perspectives and out of our own mindsets. But again, that's something that's really difficult, and, you know, that's understandable that it's really difficult, because you've had your own perspective and your own mindset your entire life. So it just makes sense to think that way. But breaking down those thoughts are going to be one of the first things. And like I said, that in itself is going to be a long, hard journey. But I will absolutely say that I am proud of the leadership that we have established in ASUN, that want to start breaking those things down and want to start having those conversations, because that's, you know, one of the biggest first steps. You know, you can't go down that road without opening up that conversation first. So that already gives me quite a bit of hope.
Could you repeat the question one more time, Dr. Likes?
Sure. How do you feel about the current ASUN student government's ability to address identity?
Okay, so, well, I guess I should preface this by saying since I am an ASUN officer, I think that my take on this question is going to be very different than someone who's not necessarily an officer, because I think my scope of ASUN is much more, I don't want to say zoomed in, I guess. It's much more focused on, you know, the things that the officer body is doing. And I think it's informed in different ways and then not informed in different ways. I definitely think it's taken steps. It's not perfect at all. I think it's taken steps. We have, you know, a new committee that's specifically dealing with these issues. I think in our previous, you know, programming events, we're taking more steps to foster events that are really culturally responsive and not just created for these certain groups of students. But in that same vein, I think, kind of like what Dom said, I think that there is a lot of misunderstanding and uneducation, or just lack of education, within the student government, that makes it really, really difficult to have these conversations or even approach the issue at all. Just because, you know, and I'm not saying just for the student, you know, not just for the white officers, not just for the officers that have privilege. I'm talking about for all officers. I think there's a lot of lack of education. on other people's experiences, on what, you know, identity and the theories behind it really are. And I think that has contributed kind of to this lack of conversation around identity, and identity politics, basically, because we are so like shut in to our factions, I almost want to say. We're so shut into our mindsets, and kind of like what Shay was saying, you know, the idea that, well, just because I'm white, that doesn't mean that, you know, I got my Senate position just because I'm white. You know, I worked really hard for it. And this defensiveness, and on, you know, in the same way, you know, students who don't have privilege saying, you know, saying that people who do have privilege are this, and this, and this. I think that really the conversations have been very unproductive when they have happened, just because it, like I mentioned before, I think it is very us versus them. You know, students with privilege are really just trying to defend themselves, saying, you have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not like that. My privilege doesn't give me all these things. Students without privilege is saying, you know, this is, you know, it's your fault, or it's your privilege that you're blinded to, and things like that. And we really haven't had a lot of conversations about just having humility and just being really vulnerable and saying, maybe, you know, maybe you're right. Maybe my privilege has impacted the things that I've been able to accomplish, or, you know, maybe you're right. Maybe maybe I should see beyond your privilege and see the ways that you have actually worked for these types of things and things like that. So I definitely, to go back to the question, I definitely think that there are more things that the student government should be doing. And I think that it really starts with being vulnerable and open. And I think it's just a human thing. It's hard to do as humans, to be open and to have humility, because we have reputations to protect. So I think, but we're, you know, most of us are elected officials. All of us have been hired by either the students or people who were hired by the students. And so I think it is rightfully within our duties that we need to be open and vulnerable about these conversations.
Thank you all. I'm just gonna say, you know, it's, you know, for you all to open up and offer this vulnerability is tremendous, and it's appreciated. I think when it comes to organizations and addressing issues around diversity and inclusion, we have to be very intentional. And oftentimes it's our place of reactionary behavior that may guide our need to respond to something. And instead, we have to be in this intentional space consistently, which for those in leadership roles may feel restricting, because you now have a privilege of a position, but it opens up your personal life. It opens up all these aspects that previously were not necessarily concealed, but definitely not as open and not as visible. And it brings into that context, how are we being intentional with our leadership roles, you know, within ASUN? So I think that's something we need to think about whenever we're looking at this, because it can be easy. I was just gonna have a conversation. Is that person ready for the conversation? And it's not always about readiness, but consent. Are they consenting to engage in that? Are you bringing all parties to the table in a way in which people are open and allowing for that? So that's something to think about on these issues that can be contentious. It doesn't mean it will resolve any advent of conflict, but it will create the space that allows for growth to happen. So I know Dr. Likes was signaling me, but I know we're going to open it up to different space. So Dr. Likes, I guess.
No, I think we just want to make sure that now there is one more question we can ask of the panelists, but just that anyone who has questions or want to make comment in the whole group, you know, now the panelists have started us off with some powerhouse statements. Let's open it up to our group, and maybe then, is there anyone at this point who has their hand raised to ask a question, or would like to ask a question or make a statement? All right, Destiny, long time no see. You have the floor.
Okay, so I wasn't really trying to ask a question. I wanted to answer more of the previous question. Do you feel like the current administration in ASUN handles identity appropriately? And I kind of wanted to refer back to a statement that Shay had made that really stood out to me. She said that Dominique is representing a minority of students, Black students on this campus, and that sometimes students on this campus are not ready for that kind of thing. And I feel like Dominique being elected as president kind of did show the unreadiness of certain students and ASUN as a whole. Personally, since I'm not in ASUN, I could only see the outside, but going back to that, I just, I'm trying to word how this thing is gonna go. I feel like in ASUN personally, when it comes to electing someone from a diverse background, it looks good to them on paper, it looks good to them on the outside, but when it actually comes to bringing in difficulties or bringing in different perspectives, that's when they kind of see it as something that is unseen or divided. I remember going back to Dominique's previous statement that students of color and Black people are not the same. Personally, Black students might see that as a true statement, while others might not see that as a true statement. And I felt like at that time, that was the perfect time to actually see dialogue and bring in dialogue. But when it comes to Dominique being a minority student, that is her perspective, and the unreadiness of ASUN kind of shut it down and saw her as automatically being divisive, when in that case, she's not being divisive. She's actually bringing in her personal experiences as a Black woman on campus and as a Black woman in society. Do I kind of make sense?
Make perfect sense. I think everything that's been said today has made incredible sense. And so, yes, thank you, Destiny. Yes. And the floor is open right now. Same question, previous questions. Just making sure that we can get everyone who wants to be involved. And there is another question for the panelists, but I didn't want to move on without seeing if there's anyone who wanted to raise their hand. There's a lot on the table right now. There's a lot to talk about, and sometimes it takes time to process. I think that even when you start these discussions, we want to have an immediate answer. We want to have, I understand and feel this all right now. I can express it verbally. Sometimes it might come to you in the next week. You're like, oh, Destiny said that a week ago, but now I figured it out. So don't worry, we're not in a rush, but if you want to, we don't want to leave anyone out. One more chance to raise your hand if you have something you'd like to say, and then I'll ask the question.
I raised my hand. I'm not sure if you can see it on there.
Oh, I didn't see it. No, I didn't.
All right, can I go ahead?
Yes, how do I say your name?
Abui.
Abui.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So I feel like the first step in all of this is recognizing that, you know, with all these committees that we talk about, like, you know, ASU and creating these communities to discuss identity issues, a lot of people in these groups do not represent the student population. So these people are having discussions, they're having judgments on other people's opinions and serving those judgments, like just bringing up the example of the whole issue that started with President Hall claiming to be the first Black president. On that, you know, panel of moderators, there wasn't anyone that was Black. And it felt as though they were trying to coerce Dom to give a sort of politically correct answer. I feel like for these conversations to happen, the people that are involved in these issues need to be in those kind of positions where they're able to moderate and give their own opinions. I feel like a lot of the issues that UNR that stem from, at least Black issues from my knowledge, always start with someone who is not Black trying to play sort of the white savior to have those discussions. And as a Black person, I feel like for you to have to be in that position, you need to discuss with Black people to find out what their perspective on. I feel like most of the times they try to push off ideology or opinion and claim it as what it is, but it doesn't represent the Black community. Just as we I know a couple days ago, there was this whole thing on Twitter about what it means to be Black and what that means in correlation to being a person of color. A lot of Black students did feel like they didn't qualify as a person of color because their experiences as a Black person is very different from other people of color. And that is not to diminish the struggles of other people of color. You know, different races of people go through their own struggles that we Black people can never experience. But when we try to put front our identity, people always seems to think it's more of a us versus them situation, which it isn't, because it's us expressing our opinions on what it means to be Black in American at UNR. And it's very disappointing to see that a lot of the people that said negative things were ASUN representatives. It's just frustrating to see that people who are supposed to be in a position that are supposed to represent students are not properly representing students as they should. And I just felt like a lot of the times where people would make statements in regards to Dominique Hall's statements on issues dealing with Blackness, it felt very microaggressive. They probably didn't realize that, and that's the main issue. But they probably didn't realize that, but it was microaggressive, just from my perspective as a Black person. And I feel like ASUN is a long way from being good at addressing issues with identity, but right now I just don't think they're there yet.
And I mean, okay, I saw Shay your hand up, and I just let's not stop it. Let's keep going while we got the time. We were saying stuff.
I just wanted to jump off a point that both Destiny and Abui had said about, particularly Destiny, about the way that she had brought up us not quite being ready for that representation in ASUN. Again, it is a representation that is needed, but to be quite honest with you, I know exactly both of what's being talked about, but even before the voting happened for ASUN president, I feel like I saw our campus not being ready for these conversations and not being ready for this representation. I had the wonderful privilege of being on the team that helped put together the town hall. My sorority put together this wonderful queer town hall in which we got to talk to candidates for ASUN president and talk about what their experiences were. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was at one point Dominique had said that there have been issues with our police services on campus. And as much as she wanted to promise people that, you know, she could go in their place and talk to police officers and be that voice for them at those tables, that as a Black woman, she simply didn't feel comfortable with it. And I immediately saw, other, white people in the audience that immediately almost kind of diminished that experience for her. I saw, people asking questions of, oh, well, have you talked to police services? Have you actually had conversations with them? Have you actually taken a minute to explore what they do on a regular basis? And as a Black person, that immediately got to me. Like the fact that that was an immediate diminishing of her experience as a Black person on this campus and the interactions that she has had with the people that are supposed to be in charge on this campus a lot of the time, that are supposed to be there to protect us. And the fact that she's stating these experiences as a Black person and didn't want to elaborate, because fairly she didn't have to, just to be turned around and to essentially be asked, well, are you sure that was your experience? Are you sure that's how you feel? Are you sure that you're valid in how you feel? That even before, and again, this
yes, I am sure.
And again, this was a conversation that happened. This was a town hall that happened well before the voting happened for ASUN president. And that told me enough about, are we ready to have someone in that office? Truthfully, we weren't, but we need to have someone in that office. And I think that experiences such as that just highlight how much we need to start having these conversations, because the sheer fact that a Black woman outright said, I don't want to be near a police officer. I don't want to talk to a police officer because of my own experiences and my own, identity that has an impact on how that police officer is going to see me, to have that immediately being diminished and immediately having that, essentially looked at as, well, you might be, that's what that felt like to me, is you might be making things up. You might be being dramatic as a Black person. And that in itself told me a whole lot. So I just want to say that I am absolutely very, very proud of the fact that we were able to move forward and have a Black woman in office so that we can start having these conversations and start shutting down things such as that of diminishing those experiences, because we have to take a look at, you know, if you haven't had that experience with a police officer, that's great, good for you, but that's not going to match up to somebody else. Someone else could have a completely different story and a completely different outlook, and theirs is just as valid.
I think one of the places we land on this is race. It is almost taboo on our campus, I'm going to say, because that's where we're at, to admit that racism exists or that a racist experience is happening. We have to spend so much time painting it a different way as, oh, but the fact that, and I didn't realize this until about halfway into my dissertation. My advisor I was trying to do it. I was trying to say, well, this was a microaggression. By the way, that's Chester Pierce. And microaggression doesn't mean small. For him, it meant everyday racism. And that was the precursor to crit race theory. But we can't admit when racism actually happens. And so if we can't do that, we can't move forward, because if everything is not racism. But if we can't even say what is racism, then we can't define what isn't racism. And that's the space that allies have a hard time entering, because if you're an ally and you want to come into the space, but you're already a racist for being an ally, like there has to be a space for someone who is not Black to address anti-Blackness. And so, but we can't even say that racism is there. So very, very strong words. And I didn't want to jump in, but y'all teaching some stuff. And maybe only one more to Abui. We as Black administrators are Black on this campus. And so when we come to the table with our concerns, with student concerns, we are still perceived as Black. It didn't go away because we got degrees. It didn't go away because we got checks or positions. And in all honesty, people of color, the term is coined, as Jose taught us as our staff, it was coined as people of color realizing that we could come together and be stronger. It wasn't a way to separate us and say, well, you're over there and you have, it was, we are people of color. Guess what? When they stopped the Bracero program at the border, they put literacy tests. That's the same thing they did to stop Black people from voting. That oppression is overlapping. Our oppressions they're coming from same sources, even some of the same policies. And so when we definitely anti-Blackness is strong. There's no doubt about it. We live it, right? But racism is strong. This oppression that's lasted for a long time. Right now, API folk going through it, right? And sometimes we turn on each other and we attack each other's community. I think that's why people of color is such a strength. I think that's why intersectionality is such an interesting way to look at it, because you know what how will we fight? And I think that systems of oppression are overlapping. And I think that's the quote that I got from intersectionality. And how we dismantle them, it could be in some of the things that you're saying, and even just, who came to the table today. I don't know everybody who's in this room, but usually it's, if you're the choir, you're coming to a panel about diversity and identity. And if you don't want to talk about it, you're not going to come to the panel. You're not logging into the Zoom unless you're forced. And so even who's going to come to the table and listen to you say what you feel? And at some point, though, racism, we have to be able, back to the beginning, to say when something is specifically racist. And then maybe when it's not, just because it deals with race doesn't mean it's racist. I think we had another question, but is there another hand? Jose, did you, yes.
Jody,
Yeah.
thank you for that. I think Jody and I have these conversations very frequently, and our fear is people will fall into these oppression Olympics in which we are pitted against each other. And we have to realize oppression is not a contest. And oftentimes we can fall into that space. We need to acknowledge differential experiences we may have. I'm white appearing. So whenever I engage in spaces, people engage with me and I get to take into that space that white privilege. And it's a capital in which I can utilize either to help people of color and help oppressed folks, or internalize that and then believe that system is somehow right. And so overarching, we do have a responsibility to address the larger issue of white supremacy that sits above us and manages all these systems. Because when we work against each other, we're actually working in benefit of that system, right? And we're in a higher ed institution. We have an opportunity to learn, to engage, to debate, to put our ideas on the table and see if they hold water, right? To see that. And that's why I always tell folks, it's best to do that, to challenge yourself and challenge others in a healthy way. And it may feel uncomfortable, but in the end, we're all better for it, for challenging and pushing and saying the things that are true to us and putting them out there. And they may be difficult, but we're going to be in a better place after. And I realize that because, you know, that's the kind of environment I hope to cultivate with the center and the students that come in the center with my staff. Just because I have some hierarchical power within the structure as director doesn't mean that my staff shouldn't be able to challenge me on systems that may not be working for them or maybe working against students. And so that's you're all bringing up great points. Thank you for your engagement on this.
Hi, sorry, I didn't want to cut anyone off, but I just wanted to talk a little bit into what like Destiny said and like what Abui said and a couple points that President Hall has brought up about this town hall. And I'm gonna address like everything straight on. I was involved in the altercation and come to Twitter and, you know, kind of talking about the issues of like anti-Blackness and kind of like people of color and different kind of issues that people face as a person of color. I think that, and also talking about intersectionality and like what, I'm sorry, I forgot her name. Someone said something that really jumped out to me, just like on how unsafe you feel on campus. Like as myself, I identify as a person of color, but no one kind of understands the journey that I was on growing up. Like I was born in the Philippines, lived in Skyline, San Diego. I don't know if you guys know where that is, but it's a community predominantly African-American. I grew up with African-American kids. I was kind of not into the culture, but I saw it. I saw my friends who were scared that their father was going to be arrested for being Black. I saw my friends who were scared of speaking because they were African-American, but it also kind of gave me the opportunity to ask questions, to ask why. Like, why is it scared? Because I didn't understand. I spoke no English coming into America, but I think now being in the point where I am, growing up with people who are African American, I was raised in high school. I was raised by someone I consider my second mom, who's a Latina. I understand Spanish. It kind of like diversed me into the issues that all persons of color and African Americans go through. And I think it's very interesting that like even Dr. Likes was saying that all this oppression is coming from one source, because it is. And like I really appreciated what Mr. Leon, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, but saying that it's not a contest. It's not who's oppressed the most. It's we're all oppressed. And I think that people during that time of the tweets, my tweet, I'm going to quote my tweet exactly. I said that President Hall was uneducated and discrediting people of color. My friends who felt offense into her statement were telling me, no, don't back down. Like say something. But, and then also people ask me like, oh, now like you won't have a future. Like people are going to hold this tweet against you. And I invite them to. I think that this experience allowed me to have a conversation with Destiny on calling me out and saying, no, that was disrespectful, and agreed. I 100% agreed after thinking and talking to people. It was disrespectful to talk to say that she was uneducated when I could have just sent her text and, hey, Dom, I want to know more about that. And I think a lot of people, like when we were talking about ASUN officials, are scared to speak out about these issues. It's because of things like what happened to myself. And I don't regret it, because now I feel more educated with persons of color. I feel more educated with African Americans, anti-Blackness, intersectionality, all of that stuff. And I think that's something to not be ashamed of. And, you know, people ask me, they're like, you know, Diego, like you were in ASUN talking, you want to be ASUN president. What happens now? What happens in 4 years when someone says, you know, Diego Lim is a racist? He said this about Dominique Hall. I have an explanation. I have a platform to say, I got education. I talked to mentors. I talked to my friends. I talked to people who go to HBCU colleges and told me, you know, Diego, like, I understand where you're coming from, but I see where also they're coming from. A lot of my friends told me who are people of color, growing up in a week in a Latina household, growing up with my parents who are immigrants, who are Filipino, who didn't know how to speak English coming into this country. I was talking to my parents about this, and they're like, you know, like you're fighting for people of color, and appreciate that. But it's also kind of like taking a step back, like what someone had said previously, and looking at the bigger perspective and kind of looking at what can you do to improve yourself? What can you do to further educate yourself? And I think that's important to acknowledge. And I think when it comes to just addressing the first question asked, like, when did your identity make you feel unsafe on campus? A lot of times. There's times where there are people in front of me at a line speaking Spanish and talking about myself, talking how I have chinky eyes. But then it's funny because I respond back in Spanish and they're like, whoa, like, how do you understand that? It's kind of identifying with these different identities on campus. And it's like those spaces where you feel unsafe. And it's those spaces where you feel like you need to be pushed forward to stand up for these people. And like, I did express my apologies, and I'm here to express my apologies again. Like, I do apologize to President Hall. I do apologize to Destiny, to Bowie, and to every person who I've offended. But I don't apologize for the learning experience that I got as a person and as a leader and as someone who wants betterment for this university. I witnessed President Hall talk to my church. She told us how she will kind of give us a seat at the table as someone who is religious, as someone who believes in faith. And I acknowledge that. I admired her for that. It's very uncomfortable for someone to go into a safe place like a church to say, hey, like, I'm gonna try to advocate for you. I'm gonna try to give you a seat at the table. And that's something that's very admirable. And I think that when we talk about ASUN officers, not like, and how they stand with issues like racism and all these things, I think that it's time to be more educated, and it's time to like set those boundaries down and say, hey, like, I want to learn, I want to reach out. But then like also thinking about like society, it's like, it's not normal. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not something that we usually do. We don't say, hey, teach me about this. Because I agree to that. Like, I've never been like, hey, can you teach me about anti-Blackness? Until I said that tweet, until I tweeted, until Destiny quote tweeted me and responded to my terms, and until we had exchanges and direct messages. I think this experience is very valuable, not just for me, and it should be for everyone else, in terms of not being scared to stand up for what they believe in and get education throughout that way.
Diego?
And I just want,
I know I apologize, but we're nearing the last 5 minutes, and I wanted to allow Dr. Rodriguez to
yeah, of course,
step in, but I really appreciate your commentary and your ability to humble yourself in the learning process. It's a very important part of self-education and reflection.
Gonna limit my comment. I want to say up front that I really appreciate this conversation, but I think a word that's important that we all walk away with is I believe that many times before you can learn, you have to unlearn. So when I hear this conversation about ASUN as a whole, to me, we're talking about a system, right? Systemic isms. People that get elected into ASUN, just like the varied experiences on the screen, they come in at different places and different times, right? And with different levels of knowledge. But it's been my experience that in groups like that, first we have to go into reflection, which I think, Jago, really that's what you've been talking about, right? The reflection. And part of that has to come from an understanding that we have to unlearn before we can even get into a space where we can begin to have conversations intra and in, across the board. But I'm going to stop there. Yeah, we're at the end, I know.
Well, I mean, I know Dr. Likes will speak as well if he feels that, but these things are not easy, and this is not a not easy thing to engage in. And if you have a feeling of dissonance, that means that you're in the right place, actually. It means that you're starting to, that uneasiness you feel is growth. It doesn't mean you should leave it there though, because you have to move that into something else that is about that reflective space. I know that's something I always go to Sandy to talk about, to Dr. Rodriguez, because I can get caught up in that reactionary behavior, and you need to be reflective in these instances, especially. So please take that, with you. We've heard a lot of wonderful things from everyone today, and people have offered that vulnerability. And in that comes the building, the foundation of trust to have further discussions on this topic. You are campus leaders, even if you don't hold a title. And so therefore you have a responsibility to take this education into other spaces. It's not this precious thing that we hoard. It's something that we offer, right? And as communities that have been oppressed, if you are from one, you know that. It's our responsibility to bust those doors open and let other folks in. And that's the point at which we can begin, a point to depart from, not to arrive in, right? So I don't, Dr. Likes.
Yeah, my first thought is mostly an applause. I dream of sitting with students who will say the things you've said today. And most of my frustration in my role is for not having students come and say those things and start these conversations. And so hopefully you will keep them going. And the worst part of it is when we just put it in a box and say, well, we did our forum for an hour and we're good. We do this all day. The other part is that the discomfort is much less a problem than if you stay silent, right? So the discomfort in opening up this conversation is way better than if you just be quiet and just let things build and build and build. And all of a sudden on campus, we've got tensions that we never addressed, and that's dangerous. But this is discomfort that we came in and said, you know what, I might not agree with you, but I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to share, and I'm going to listen, and I might agree with you. So please don't stop. And if you want to talk to me, I'm around the corner. Usually when we're in the center, I don't know how we're going to do that social distancing, but more than anything, please continue. Y'all are saying the things that we got to say. That's beyond just leaders. Y'all are rocking it. So thank you.
So I just wanted to kind of finish off the town hall by first of all thanking you all for coming today and having such a great discussion together. These town halls will be recurring monthly and are meant to be proactive ways and opportunities to talk about intersectionality, gender, race, and identity. We'll be sending out a survey to you individually so that we can improve our town halls in the future. Additionally, please feel free to reach out to the ASUN Department of Diversity and Inclusion, including myself, for suggestions on topics and discussions that you would like to see in subsequent town halls. Once again, thank you all for joining us today.